Arav believed in lines. Straight lines, clean angles, and perfect measurements. As an architect, his world was a testament to order, a place where every brick had a purpose and every window was placed with deliberate precision. His life, much like the buildings he designed, was a model of minimalism and control. At 38, he had finally bought his own house, a sleek, modern structure with glass walls and a stark white interior. It was a space he could understand, a blank canvas that reflected the organized landscape of his own mind. There were no dusty trinkets from the past, no cluttered shelves holding on to forgotten memories. Everything had its place, and everything in its place was essential. One sunny Saturday, armed with a ladder and a determination to rid his new home of its last vestiges of history, he decided to tackle the attic. It was the only part of the house that didn't conform to his minimalist ideal. The air up there was thick and heavy with the scent of old wood and forgotten time. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light cutting through the grimy window. He moved carefully, navigating a maze of discarded boxes and draped furniture, his footsteps echoing softly in the silence. He was just looking for old insulation to check, maybe a few leftover boxes from the previous owners he could toss out. In the far corner, under a heavy, stained canvas tarp, was a large, bulky shape. It didn't look like a table or a set of chairs. Curiosity, a feeling he rarely entertained, nudged him forward. He gripped the edge of the tarp and pulled. A cloud of dust erupted around him, making him cough and wave a hand in front of his face. As the air settled, he saw it. It was a piano. An old, upright piano, its dark wood scarred and scuffed in places, but still holding an air of quiet dignity. It looked completely out of place, like a whisper from a different world had somehow gotten lost in his clean, logical home. Its ivory keys were yellowed with age, and intricate, almost floral carvings decorated the panel above the keyboard. He ran a finger along the dusty wood, feeling the rough texture against his skin. He had no memory of ever playing a piano, nor did his family own one. It must have been left behind, abandoned by someone who couldn't take it with them. He pulled out his phone and dialed his mother's number, expecting a simple, casual conversation. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the empty attic. "Just doing some clearing out in the attic. You won't believe what I found up here." An old piano. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, a pause so slight that anyone else might have missed it. But Arav, a man who noticed details, felt it. "A piano?" His mother's voice came back, a little too high, a little too tight. "Are you sure?" "Yeah, I'm sure." "A big old upright one? I don't suppose it's from our family, is it?" "I don't remember one." "No," she said, a little too quickly. "No, we never had a piano. It must belong to the people who lived there before. Just get rid of it, Arav. Call a junk removal service. It's probably just taking up space." Her tone was strange. It wasn't just dismissive. It was edged with something he couldn't quite place. A hint of anxiety. A flicker of pain. It was a tone that shut the conversation down completely. "Okay, Mom," he said slowly, a frown creasing his forehead. "I'll figure something out." After he hung up, he stood there in the dusty attic, looking at the silent instrument. His mother's reaction bothered him. It was a small, illogical thing in an otherwise logical day. A man like Arav would have normally followed her advice. A piano was useless to him. It was large, heavy, and didn't fit with the aesthetic of his home. He should have been on the phone with a removal company within minutes. But he didn't. Instead, he found himself pulling the tarp back over the piano, but gently this time, as if tucking it in for a nap. He told himself he would deal with it later, that he was just too busy with work to make the call right now. But a deeper, quieter part of his brain knew that wasn't the whole truth. The mystery of it, the strange reaction from his mother, had planted a seed of curiosity in his meticulously ordered mind. A week passed. The piano sat in the attic, a silent presence that Arav found himself thinking about at odd moments. While drawing blueprints at work, while drinking his morning coffee, the image of the yellowed keys would flash in his mind. Finally, he gave in. He found a number for a local piano tuner online, an older man named Mr. Sharma who came highly recommended. When Mr. Sharma arrived, he was a small, wiry man with kind eyes and fingers that moved with a practiced, delicate grace. "Ah, a beauty," Mr. Sharma said, his voice full of reverence as he lifted the tarp. "Old, but a good quality instrument. See these carvings? This isn't a factory-made piece. This has history." Arav watched as the tuner worked, his tools making small, precise clicks and plucks within the belly of the piano. He tightened strings, tapped hammers, and adjusted tiny felt pads. He worked with the quiet focus of a surgeon. After a couple of hours, he sat on the worn bench and played a simple scale. The notes that filled the attic were clear, resonant, and surprisingly beautiful. They seemed to chase away the dust and the shadows, breathing life back into the old wood. "She's all tuned up for you," Mr. Sharma said, closing the keyboard lid with a soft thud. "A fine instrument. You play?" Arav shook his head. "No, I just found it. Well, a piano like this is meant to be played," the old man said with a gentle smile. "Don't let it go silent again." After Mr. Sharma left, Arav found himself alone in the attic with the now-tuned piano. The house was quiet, the evening sun casting long shadows across the floor. He felt a strange pull, an inexplicable urge he couldn't logically explain. He slowly sat down on the bench, the wood creaking under his weight. He lifted the lid, revealing the pristine, now white keys. He had never played a musical instrument in his life. His world was one of blueprints and calculations, not melodies and harmonies. He felt a little foolish, like an imposter. He hesitated for a long moment, his fingers hovering over the keys. They looked like a row of small, white teeth. Finally, with a sense of both trepidation and wonder, he pressed down on a single key in the middle of the keyboard. A middle C dot. The note that rang out was not just a sound. It was a physical force. It hung in the air, pure and clear, and then something happened. A jolt, sharp and icy cold, shot up his arm from his fingertip. It wasn't an electric shock. It was something deeper, something that felt ancient and overwhelming. It was a wave of emotion so powerful and so alien that it stole his breath. A profound and inexplicable sorrow washed over him, so intense it felt like a physical weight pressing down on his chest. It was a feeling of deep, gut-wrenching loss, a dread so thick and suffocating that he felt he was drowning in it. For a split second, a flash of an image, blurry and indistinct, flickered behind his eyes, a spinning room, a feeling of falling. A high-pitched laugh that was suddenly cut short. He snatched his hand back as if he had been burned. His heart was hammering against his ribs, and a cold sweat beaded on his forehead. He stared at the piano, his breath coming in ragged gasps. It was just a note. A single sound. How could it cause such a violent, painful reaction? He was a man of logic, of science. There had to be an explanation. A weird acoustic phenomenon? A sudden spike in blood pressure? He tried to rationalize it, to put it into a neat, understandable box. But he couldn't. The feeling was still there, a ghost of a pain that didn't belong to him, echoing in the sudden, heavy silence of the room. Shaken to his core, he slammed the keyboard lid shut, the loud bang echoing his own internal turmoil. He stood up and backed away, his eyes fixed on the silent instrument as if it were a wild animal that had just shown him its teeth. His perfectly ordered world had just been cracked wide open by a single, mysterious note. The days that followed were strange and unsettling for Arav. The house, once his sanctuary of order and quiet, now felt different. It wasn't haunted in a cliché, spooky way. There were no cold spots or strange noises in the night. The change was inside him. The silence of the house, which he used to find peaceful, now felt heavy, as if it were holding its breath, waiting. He found himself avoiding the attic, but his thoughts would drift up the stairs, to the corner where the old piano sat under its gray canvas shroud. That single, clear note he had played echoed not in his ears, but in his mind, a constant, unwelcome hum at work. He tried to lose himself in the clean lines and precise calculations of his blueprints. He designed a new public library, its structure a testament to logic and function. But as he traced the lines for a support beam, his mind would flash back to the jagged, lightning bolt of pain that had shot through him. He would find himself staring out the large window of his office, his reflection a blank mask, while inside a storm of confusion raged. He was a man who solved problems. He built things that made sense. This was a problem with no blueprint, no logical solution. He started researching online late at night, typing queries into a search engine that felt absurdly simple for the complexity of his experience. Can a sound cause an emotional reaction? Acoustic trauma and memory. Unexplained physical sensations. The results were a mix of scientific papers and pseudoscience, none of which quite captured the raw, visceral feeling that had overtaken him in the attic. He felt like he was trying to describe a color to someone who had never seen it. A week after the tuner's visit, the silence became unbearable. The not knowing was worse than the fear. He felt a desperate need to test it, to prove to himself that it was a fluke, a one-time event. Maybe he was just tired or stressed from work. Yes, that had to be it. A combination of low blood sugar and the weird atmosphere of the attic. His logical mind grasped at these straws. Building a fragile raft of rationalization to sail on the sea of his confusion, he climbed the stairs to the attic on a Sunday afternoon, the light outside soft and golden. He told himself it was just another task on his to-do list. Deal with the piano. He pulled the tarp off, the familiar scent of dust and old wood filling the air. The piano sat there, innocent and silent. It looked like nothing more than a piece of old, heavy furniture. He sat on the bench, his movements deliberate, as if he were defusing a bomb. He took a deep breath, his heart already beating a little faster. He didn't know what to play. He didn't know how to play anything. But he needed a sequence of notes, something more than just one. He thought of the simplest song he could remember, a melody from a distant, hazy part of his own childhood. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. It was a child's song, simple and pure. It felt safe. He placed his fingers on the keys, his index fingers hunting for the starting notes. He pressed down, one by one. The first few notes were clumsy and disconnected, but they were clear. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. As the simple, childish melody filled the quiet attic, it started again. It wasn't as sudden or as violent as the first time. It was slower, like a fog rolling in. A dull ache began to form behind his eyes, a gentle pulsing that grew stronger with each note he plunked out. He kept playing, his focus narrowing, a strange compulsion driving him forward. The air around him seemed to thicken, to shimmer. The melody continued, "How I wonder what you are." And then the images came. Not a clear picture, but fragments like shards of broken glass, a flash of bright cherry red. The color of a dress, small and swirling. A giggle, high and sweet, that seemed to dance just on the edge of the music. The feeling of a small, warm body sitting next to him on the bench, the pressure of a tiny shoulder against his arm. He could almost smell the scent of strawberry shampoo. His fingers faltered on the keys, but the vision didn't stop. He saw a blur of blonde hair, tied up in pigtails that bounced with a happy, unrestrained energy. He saw small, chubby fingers, much smaller than his, trying to copy the melody he was playing. Pressing down on the wrong notes and laughing got the pain behind his eyes sharpened into a spike. The image of the little girl turned to look at him, her face a blur of light and shadow, but he could feel her smile. It was a smile full of love and trust. And then, just as quickly as it came, it was gone. The vision vanished, the pain receded, and he was left sitting on the bench, his fingers frozen on the keys. The last note of "Twinkle, twinkle, little star" hanging in the air before fading into silence. He stumbled away from the piano, his breath catching in his throat. He was shaking. He leaned against the attic wall, sliding down to sit on the floor, his head in his hands. It wasn't a fluke. It was real. Or he was seriously, dangerously ill? A brain tumor, maybe? That was a terrifyingly logical explanation. But this felt different. It didn't feel like a symptom. It felt like a memory that wasn't his. He spent the rest of the day in a daze, sitting in the stark, clean living room of his house, trying to anchor himself in the present. The modern furniture, the neutral colors, the large window looking out onto his perfectly manicured garden, it all felt like a movie set. The real world, he felt, was the one with the little girl in the red dress. The next day, driven by a frantic need for proof, he drove to his parents' house. He made up an excuse about needing to look for some old documents for a property survey, a believable lie that his architect persona could pull off. In their garage, buried under boxes of old tools and holiday decorations, he found the stack of old photo albums. He carried them inside and sat at the kitchen table, flipping through the plastic-covered pages. He saw pictures of himself as a baby, a toddler, a young boy. He saw birthday parties and family vacations. But he was looking for something else. He scanned every photo, his eyes searching the corners, the backgrounds. He was looking for a flash of red, a corner of a piano, a hint of blonde pigtails. He found nothing. In every single picture, it was just him, an only child. Happy, smiling, alone. The absence of evidence was more chilling than any clue he could have found. It was as if someone had carefully, meticulously erased a person from his history. The hole in his past was no longer a vague feeling. It was a gaping, empty space, and the silence where the little girl should have been was the loudest sound of all. The drive to his parents' house felt longer than it ever had before. The blurred green of the trees and the rhythmic thump of the tires on the asphalt were a monotonous backdrop to the chaos in his mind. He was no longer a man of logic on a quest for answers. He felt like a detective chasing a ghost that might be living inside his own head. The rational explanations had all crumbled. A brain tumor didn't explain the specific. Recurring images, the flash of a red dress, the sound of a little girl's laugh. This was something else, something deeply personal and terrifyingly real. The knot of ice in his stomach told him that the answers he was seeking wouldn't be found in a medical journal or on a website. They were locked away in the memories of the two people who knew him best. He found his mother in the garden, kneeling on a small foam pad tending to her rosebush. The afternoon sun was warm and the air smelled of damp earth and fragrant flowers. It was a scene of perfect peace, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside him. She looked up as he approached, her face breaking into a warm, familiar smile. "Arav, what a nice surprise." "I wasn't expecting you." He didn't return the smile. He just stood there, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his expression grave. The shift in his mood was immediate and palpable. His mother's smile faltered. She slowly stood up, pulling off her gardening gloves. "What is it, Beta? Is everything okay?" He took a deep breath, the words catching in his throat. How could he even begin? He decided to start with the one tangible thing he could point to. "It's about the piano," he said, his voice quieter than he intended. "The one in the attic?" A shadow passed over his mother's face. It was the same look he had seen over the phone, but magnified 100 times. Her body tensed, and she wouldn't meet his eyes, instead focusing on a point just over his shoulder. "I told you," she said, her voice tight. "It's nothing. Just get rid of it." "I can't," Arav said, his voice gaining a little strength. "Mom, something happens when I touch it. I see things. I feel things." He paused, searching for the right words that wouldn't make him sound insane. "I see a little girl. She has blonde hair and pigtails. She wears a red dress." The color drained from his mother's face. She took a small, involuntary step back, her hand flying to her mouth. Her eyes, usually so full of warmth, were now wide with a mixture of fear and profound, aching sadness. She looked like she had seen a ghost. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, you can't." "I do," Arav pressed on, his desperation pushing him forward. "And I hear a song. A simple song like 'Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star,' and when I play it, my head hurts and I feel so sad. It's not my sadness, Mom. It belongs to someone else." Just then, his father came out of the house, holding 2 glasses of iced tea. He stopped short when he saw the scene in front of him. He looked from his son's distressed face to his wife's pale, shocked expression. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Arav's mother didn't answer. She just stared at her son, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She was trembling. Arav turned to his father. Dad, I need to know. Who was the little girl? Why is there a piano in my attic? Why does Mom react like this whenever I mention it? His father looked at his wife, a long, silent conversation passing between them in a single glance. It was a look filled with years of shared pain, a secret they had both carried. He set the glasses down on a small wooden table and walked over to his wife, putting a gentle arm around her shoulders. Anjali, he said softly, maybe it's time. She shook her head, burying her face in her hands. A single, heart-wrenching sob escaped her lips. No, we promised. We promised we would never tell him. It would be too cruel. Keeping it from him is what's cruel, her husband said gently, his voice thick with emotion. Look at him. He's remembering. It's coming back anyway. He deserves to know the truth. He guided his shaking wife over to a garden bench and sat her down. He sat beside her, holding her hand, and then looked up at Arav. His eyes filled with a grief so deep it seemed to have aged him in an instant. Son, sit down, he said, his voice heavy. Arav sat on the grass in front of them, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt like he was on the edge of a cliff, about to be pushed off into an abyss. His father took a long, shaky breath. You didn't grow up an only child, Arav. You had a little sister. The words hit Arav like a physical blow. He felt the air leave his lungs. A sister. The idea was so foreign, so impossible, that his mind refused to accept it. Her name was Maya, his father continued, his voice barely a whisper. She was 3 years younger than you. She was the light of our lives. A happy, vibrant little girl. Everyone who met her loved her. His mother looked up, her face streaked with tears. For the first time she spoke, her voice fragile as glass. She loved the piano. That was hers. The one in your attic. She was a prodigy. She could hear a song once and play it back perfectly. It was like the instrument was a part of her. The pieces started to click into place with a horrifying final sound. The piano. The music. The little girl. It wasn't a ghost. It was a memory. A memory that wasn't his. What happened to her? Arav asked, the words feeling alien in his mouth. His mother let out another sob, and his father squeezed her hand tighter. There was an accident, he said. A few days after her 6th birthday. You were 8. You two had been playing. You had a fight. He paused, looking at Arav with an expression of profound pity. It was a normal sibling fight, Arav. You were jealous of the attention she got with the piano. You said some things that children say when they're angry. His mother took over, her voice cracking with the weight of decades of unshed grief. You screamed at her. You told her you hated her and that you wished her stupid piano would disappear. You ran to your room and slammed the door. She was so upset. She put on her favorite red dress, the one she always wore to feel happy, as she ran out of the house. She was just going to the park at the end of the street. She never even made it across the road. The world tilted on its axis. The flash of the red dress. The high-pitched laugh that was cut short. The feeling of falling. It was all there, buried under 30 years of silence. He wasn't just remembering a little girl. He was remembering his own sister, and his own last words to her. The trauma? It was too much for you, his father explained, his voice gentle. You saw it happen from your bedroom window. After that, you just stopped? You didn't speak for weeks. When you finally did, you had no memory of her. The doctors called it a dissociative amnesia. Your mind, to protect itself from a pain too great for a child to bear, simply erased her. It erased the piano, the fight, everything. We thought it was a blessing. We didn't want to cause you more pain by reminding you of something you'd forgotten. So we packed away her things, sold the house, and never spoke of her again. Arav sat on the grass, the sun warm on his back, but he felt utterly cold. The vague, undefined melancholy that had been a shadow over his entire life suddenly had a name, Maya, the inexplicable distance he had always felt from his parents. The unspoken sadness that sometimes filled their home, it all made perfect, agonizing sense. They weren't just parents mourning a lost daughter. They were parents mourning a lost daughter in front of a son who didn't even know she had ever existed. He looked at his mother's weeping face, at his father's grief-stricken eyes, and for the first time he saw them not just as his parents, but as two people who had been carrying an impossible burden for 30 years. And he realized the lifetime of pain he had always felt as a vague, undefined melancholy was the ghost of a sister he didn't know he had lost. The world didn't just tilt on its axis, it shattered. Arov sat on the cool grass of his parents' garden. The words, "her name was Maya," echoing in the vast, empty space where his life story used to be. The sun was still shining, the roses still smelled sweet, but the reality he had known for 38 years was gone, replaced by something he couldn't begin to comprehend. He felt like a stranger in his own life. An actor who had been playing a part without knowing the script was missing its most crucial chapter. He looked at his mother's tear-streaked face and his father's grief-heavy eyes, and for the first time he saw them not just as his parents, but as two people who had been carrying an impossible burden for 30 years. And he realized the lifetime of pain he had always felt as a vague, undefined melancholy was the ghost of a sister he didn't know he had lost. He didn't speak for a long time. What could he possibly say? His mind, a place of order and reason, was a chaotic storm. He tried to build a logical framework around the information, to file it away neatly, but it was like trying to capture a hurricane in a glass jar. The facts were simple. He had a sister. She died, he forgot. But the emotional weight of those facts was crushing, a physical pressure on his chest that made it hard to breathe. The most painful piece, the one that replayed in his mind with horrifying clarity, was the fight. His father's words, "You said some things that children say when they're angry," triggered something deep inside him. It wasn't a memory he was seeing from a distance. It was a feeling. The hot, childish rage. The sting of jealousy. The venom in his own 8-year-old voice as he screamed, "I hate you! I hate you and your stupid piano." The guilt hit him like a physical blow, so intense it made him double over. It wasn't just a memory. It was a truth that had been locked away, and now it was free, poisoning him. He was responsible. His words, his petty, childish anger had driven her out of the house. He had killed his sister. The thought was so monstrous, so unbearable, that he wanted to run, to escape from the garden, from his parents, from himself. But he couldn't move. He was rooted to the spot by the weight of his own culpability. His mother must have seen the agony on his face. She slid off the bench and knelt in the grass beside him, pulling his head into her lap. It was a gesture of comfort she hadn't made since he was a small child. "No, Beta, no," she sobbed, her tears falling into his hair. "It was not your fault. It was an accident. A terrible, terrible accident. We never, ever blamed you. That's why we never spoke of it. We couldn't bear for you to carry that." His father knelt on his other side, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "Your mother is right. You were a child. Children get angry. They say things they don't mean. What happened to Maya was a tragedy, a cruel twist of fate. It was not your fault." But even as his father spoke the words, Arav could see the doubt in his eyes, the shadow of a what-if that had haunted them for 3 decades. They had tried to convince themselves it wasn't his fault. But the seed of the idea had been planted on that terrible day, and it had grown in the silence between them. They sat there in the garden for hours. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the story of Maya slowly unfolded, not as a single, traumatic event, but as a collection of memories. His father described her infectious laugh, a sound that could fill a room. His mother remembered the way she would hum constantly, little melodies she was making up in her head. They told him about the time she tried to tune the piano by hitting the strings with a wooden spoon, and the time she hid all his socks because she thought it was a funny game. With each story, the blurry image of the little girl in his mind became a little clearer. She wasn't just a ghost. She was a person. She was Maya, his sister. Later that evening, his father came to him holding a small, worn shoebox. "We kept a few things," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "We couldn't part with everything. Inside the box, nestled in faded tissue paper, was a single photograph. It was a picture of him and a little girl. He was about 8, and she was maybe 5 or 6. He had his arm around her, and they were both grinning at the camera, a gap-toothed smile on her face. Her blonde hair was in 2 messy pigtails, and she was wearing a bright red dress. It was her. It was Maya. Looking at that photo was like looking at a ghost and a long-lost friend all at once. He could feel the memory of her small hand in his, the warmth of her body next to his. It was the most painful and the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The next day, Arav knew what he had to do. He needed to see her. He needed to make it real. He drove to the cemetery, a place he had always avoided. He found her grave easily, under a large oak tree. The headstone was small and simple, with her name, Maya, carved into it, along with her dates. He knelt in the damp grass, his fingers tracing the letters of her name. He talked to her out loud for the first time. He told her he was sorry. He told her he remembered her red dress and her pigtails. He told her he was sorry he had forgotten her. He sat there for a long time, the quiet of the cemetery, a stark contrast to the turmoil in his heart. It was a conversation 30 years overdue. When he got back to his own house, the attic was no longer a place of fear. It was a shrine. He walked up the stairs with a sense of solemn purpose. The piano sat in the corner, no longer a mysterious object, but a vessel of memory. He lifted the lid and ran his fingers over the keys. But this time there was no jolt of pain, only a profound sense of connection. He opened the bench, hoping to find something, anything, that was hers. Tucked inside a compartment, he found a stack of old sheet music. The pages were yellowed and brittle, and on the top of one page, in childish, looping handwriting, were the words, "My favorite song." There was even a small, crayon drawing of a piano in the corner. He sat on the bench, the sheet music on the stand. He had never played before, but he had to do this. He had to play her song. He placed his fingers on the keys, trying to mimic the notes on the page. It was clumsy and awkward. The melody was simple, a child's tune, but his fingers were stiff and uncooperative. He made mistakes, hitting wrong notes that sounded harsh and discordant in the quiet attic. But he kept going. He wasn't trying to create beautiful music. He was trying to have a conversation. As the clumsy, halting melody filled the room, something inside him began to break. The dam he had built around his emotions for 38 years, a dam made of logic and order and denial, finally cracked. The first tear that fell was a surprise, followed by another and another, until a torrent of grief poured out of him. He wept for the little sister he had lost, for the childhood he had forgotten, for the parents who had suffered in silence. He wept for the 8-year-old boy who had carried a guilt so heavy his mind had to shatter to survive. He slumped over the keyboard, his forehead resting on the cool ivory, his body shaking with sobs. It was a raw, cathartic release, a cleansing of a wound that had been festering beneath the surface for a lifetime. The pain was still there, sharp and real, but for the first time, it wasn't just pain. It was also love. And in the quiet attic, surrounded by the ghost of a melody, Arav finally began to heal. The months that followed were a period of quiet transformation for Arav. The change in him was not loud or sudden, but a slow, gentle softening, like ice melting in the spring sun. His colleagues at the architectural firm noticed it first. He was still the same brilliant designer, his blueprints still models of precision and logic, but there was a new warmth to him. He started joining the team for lunch, laughing at their jokes, and sometimes, when a junior architect was struggling with a design, he would offer guidance not with criticism, but with a patient, encouraging smile. The hard, logical edges that had defined him for so long had been smoothed by an experience that defied all logic. He had a new depth in his eyes, a quiet wisdom that hadn't been there before. The unnameable sadness that had always been a faint, gray cloud hanging over his life was gone, replaced by a bittersweet understanding. A sense of completeness that he had never known he was missing. His house, once a stark, minimalist showcase, had also changed. The piano was no longer hidden away in the attic. He had hired movers to bring it downstairs, and it now sat in the living room, in front of the large window that looked out onto the garden. It didn't look out of place anymore. In fact, it looked like it had always been there, the warm, dark wood of its frame, a beautiful contrast to the clean, modern lines of the room. It was no longer an object of dread or a painful mystery. It was a cherished monument, a connection to a part of himself he had lost. He played every day. It had become a ritual, a form of meditation. At first, he only played the songs from Maya's old sheet music. He learned the simple, childish melodies by heart, his fingers growing more confident with each passing day. Playing them was like having a conversation with his sister. It was his way of saying, "I remember you. I haven't forgotten you again." But as the weeks turned into months, he found himself wanting to do more than just remember. He wanted to express the complex tapestry of emotions that her memory had woven into his life. He began to experiment, to create his own music. He wasn't a trained composer, and he didn't know the rules of music theory. He just let his fingers wander on the keys, trusting his feelings to guide him. The music that emerged was not happy or upbeat. It was melancholic, filled with a deep, resonant sadness. But there was also a current of love running through it, a sense of peace and even, at times, a flicker of joy. The melodies were complex and layered, just like his feelings. They were a reflection of his journey, from the man who lived with a phantom pain he couldn't name, to the brother who was learning to live with a very real loss. The music was his way of processing the grief, of honoring Maya's life not with tears of sorrow, but with the creation of something beautiful. One evening, he invited his parents over for dinner. The relationship between them had also transformed. The unspoken barrier that had stood between them for 30 years was gone. They talked about Maya openly, sharing stories and memories, crying together, but also laughing. The house was filled with a warmth that had been absent for a lifetime. After dinner, Arav's mother looked at the piano. "Are you still playing that old thing?" she asked, a gentle smile on her face. "Every day," Arav said. "There's something I'd like to play for you both." He sat on the bench, his parents sitting on the sofa, watching him with anticipation. He took a deep breath and placed his fingers on the keys. He began to play. The song started in a minor key, the notes slow and heavy, full of a profound sense of loss and sorrow. It was the sound of a childhood with a missing piece, the sound of a family's silent grief. As he played, he saw his mother reach for his father's hand, her eyes glistening with tears. But as the melody continued, it began to change. A new theme emerged, weaving its way through the sadness. It was a melody in a major key, clear and strong, filled with a sense of hope and resilience. It was the sound of memory, of love, of healing. The two melodies, the sorrow and the hope, began to play off each other, creating a complex, beautiful harmony. It was the story of his pain and the story of his survival, all told in a language that needed no words. When he played the final chord, the sound hung in the air for a long moment before fading into silence. The room was still. His mother was crying openly, but they were not just tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of pride, of love. His father put his arm around his wife, his own eyes shining with moisture. He looked at Arav, his expression filled with a depth of emotion that words could not capture. After his parents had left, Arav sat at the piano for a long time, the house quiet once more. The moonlight streamed through the window, casting a soft glow on the keys. He thought about the title that had unknowingly defined his life. One touch on the piano revealed a lifetime of pain. It was true. That single middle C had unlocked a door to a pain so immense his mind had sealed it away for 30 years. But as he sat there, in the peaceful silence of his home, he realized that wasn't the whole story. The touch on the piano hadn't just revealed the pain. It had also revealed the love. It had revealed the sister he had lost, the memories he had cherished, and the family he had finally rediscovered. The pain had been real, but it was only one part of the song. The rest was a beautiful, complex, and ultimately healing melody. The one touch on the piano didn't just reveal a lifetime of pain. It unlocked the door to a lifetime of healing, allowing him to finally become whole.